So I am Alana, and then Nikki and Katie can introduce themselves as well. We can get started. It's a couple of minutes after, but today we're talking about an inclusive culture. The intro, again, this is a session, so we have multiple sessions. So we're just going to talk about a little part of inclusive practices in an inclusive culture. Katie's going to start us off, but I am Alana Harpeth. I am a special education teacher is my background, so that is my lens. Then I got to work with wonderful paraprofessionals in my class. I'll let Nikki and Katie introduce themselves. Maybe Nikki next, and then Katie, and then she will get us started.
I think we might have slides.
Yep, I was gonna say Katie is gonna start us off with an activity where we introduce ourselves, right,
Oh,
Katie?
I'm sorry. Great. No, I meant you introduce. I meant Nikki, and you introduce yourself. Oh, you have an activity? Oh, I didn't even know that. All right, let's go.
I think go to the next slide, Nikki.
Yeah, absolutely. So Alana,
Oh,
go ahead and introduce yourself. I'm
I'm
sorry.
sorry, I didn't see. I'm sorry, I didn't see this. So this is kind of new. If you've been here, we kind of just talked about ourselves. But this is me. My background is I went to IU in Bloomington for my undergrad, and that was where I had the most fun. Currently, I work at Indiana State University. We all do, so I have that on there, and I work at the IEPTA Center. I really like to travel. And if you have anything in common with me, I would love to see that in the chat. So if you went to IU or if you went to ISU, that would be something, or if you like to travel, that could be something in the chat. So that is my favorite place on earth. So, and I love to travel lots of warm places. I'm going to Miami in a couple of weeks for the weekend. So that is fun. I have a 12 and a 7-year-old. There they are on a forced Christmas picture. Uh, so that is me. I have a husband too. He never makes the cut. I should probably change that, but I have not. So that's a little bit about me. I am a special education teacher, and it's nice to see you guys here.
Oh, this is me. Okay, so I noticed someone just said that their son is an undergrad at IU, and I have one at IU as well. So just very short family info. We're a family of 6. We are blended. We've been blended for about 15 years. We have a 22-year-old son who just moved to Utah and is of the generation where he is living out of his SUV, which scares the ever living daylights out of me. But he is absolutely loving it. And the only way we know he's alive is when he posts food pictures on Instagram. So we will take anything we can get from that. We have a 21-year-old daughter who just graduated from Indiana State. She is an English teacher. She's filling in for a teacher right now on maternity leave, and then she has already accepted a full-time position teaching 7th grade in English in the fall, following after her mom's footsteps. And then we have 2 18-year-olds who are freshmen in college, one at IU and one at ISU. I taught middle school English for 17, 18 years before I transitioned to the center. I am also a school psychologist, and I work with some districts right now, just doing some assessment and things for kiddos as well. Like Alana, I love to travel. My only stipulation with travel is that saltwater must be involved. And I love all things related to the ocean. I love all things Harry Potter, and I bleed blue. I am somewhat embarrassed to admit I have 2 undergrads, 2 masters in EDS, and 2 semesters away from a doctorate, all from Indiana State. So short and sweet, that's me.
Thank you, Katie. I'm Nikki, bringing up the rear here and introducing myself to some of you who have become Alana and Katie fans. So thank you for allowing me to jump in on this today. I hope that you'll find my expertise is valuable in all that we discussed today. I also love to travel. I don't care where. If you are a ball of yarn in Oklahoma or a European tour, I will enjoy exploring all of it. That's just who I am. I, for a long time, ran a small Northwest Indiana nonprofit called Hannah's Hope, where we help students with disabilities access different adaptive equipment that they need to make their lives and communities more just more inclusive so that they can participate in everything that our communities have to offer. We recently had to close for a wonderful reason. We got so big that it was no longer really manageable for us. So we handed it over to a local community foundation to continue that work. with their staff that is paid and not just me doing it all night long. So I've been a member here of the TA Center for about 2 years. I really love to read. Throw that into the chat. I see the IU Purdue thing starting in the chat. How about in the chat, if you want to connect with me about books, tell me what you've been reading lately, because I sure need some good distractions from all the crazy town coming up with assessments and just different things going on. So that's a little bit about me. My family is there on the right. I have 3 daughters who are 14, 9, and 5. And they love to travel with me. So that was us at the White House, where my daughter tells me she will live someday, which it really is a toss up between there and prison. So most days. So thank you for letting me be here today. And I'm going to turn it back over to Katie.
All right, so this is an activity that we do. We love to do this in person, and we love it so much that we want to adapt it to be able to do it virtually. So we can utilize the chat for this. We can utilize, if you want to speak, you are welcome to unmute. But just thinking about, first of all, we would love to know your role in your school. So what is it that you are doing in education? And that's kind of a funny question because we kind of do it all, but what are you assigned? What are you supposed to be doing? And then as we think about what we're going to talk about today with inclusive practices, this is an idea that is at the heart of our center. We are here to support teachers to improve outcomes for students with disabilities, but we know that by doing that, we're improving outcomes for all students. So I want us to keep that in mind. And as we think about what inclusive practices might mean to you at this point in the series, where we're just really getting started with it. And this might be a new idea or a new concept to some of you. So we really want you to think about, what is it that you believe about inclusive practices or inclusion? And then we're just using that stick figure, thinking about the different parts of the body. What is it that you want to see? And so think about all of these attributes based on inclusion. With one hand, what is it that you need? But with the other hand, think about, what do I have to offer? Because we all have a unique skill set to offer our students. And then what's in your heart? What do you believe about inclusive practices? What can't you stomach? Where are you just on your inclusive journey, and where do you want to go? That's a whole lot to think about, and I understand that. And if you can just think about one of those even, and maybe throw something in the chat related to that. I know that one thing that is kind of churning my stomach and just making me nervous, and it's political, but I'm not going to get political with it. But we have so much unknown right now with education at both the state and national level. And I am that's what's making me nervous and what I can't stomach right now. I don't like not knowing things. And so I'm finding myself trying to just trust and let go in that area. But I can see in the chat, someone wrote, and I will say someone because I don't want to like call you out. I'm happy to use names. But general education teachers not understanding that everyone doesn't learn the same. And I would agree completely with that. Just seeing that everyone's treated kindly and fairly. Oh, I can offer compassion. Yes, love that. And Michelle says I can call her out. Okay. Yeah, we all have something to offer, and that is so important to keep in mind because there are some days when we wake up and we think, I don't know that I can do this. I don't know what I have to offer, but we all have something every single day. Okay, Nikki, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. And as you think of things, feel free to add them in. I want to let my students know that I am there for them no matter what. Yes, I love that. Patience and genuine love for teaching. I'm going to call out Bill. Bill, I feel like you've been with us enough that I can start using you as an example here for sure.
Okay.
So as we go through the training today, we are really going to look at a couple of different things. One of them being some research. We're just going to show you, I'm going to tell you where you can go to get more on it. No one wants to sit and listen to research topics for 90 minutes. But we're going to talk about some of the foundational beliefs of inclusive practices and inclusive environments. And then we're going to take a look at what we can control in the classroom, and then using those supports to strengthen that tier 1 where students are in the general education setting and everybody's together, right? And we have that real, true, inclusive environment for all students. So that's what we hope to accomplish with today's training. All right, like the other trainings, if you have been with us in the last couple of weeks, we have a Padlet for you guys on inclusive practices as well. We will throw that in the chat so that if you want to click on that link, you can do that as well. So we'll have the presentation handouts will be in there after the training. We'll get those in. Some different handouts that we like to use. Some of them will be mentioned in this training, I think, but a lot of them will be in upcoming trainings. So this will be something that you might want to access as we progress throughout this series, if you are signed up for this series, and then just some other resources that we like to include when we talk about inclusive practices. All right, so I want to talk about what an inclusive culture is, what it looks like, and how we have gotten to where we are hopefully having inclusive cultures. So in the chat, before we watch this Shelley Moore video, I want you to throw in some words or phrases that you would use to describe an inclusive culture. So if someone says this is an inclusive culture, what does that mean to you? So we get equitable. I love that. A safe space. One of my educational pet peeves is when people talk about the inclusion room or the inclusion teacher. I don't understand that because if I go to the teacher who's not the inclusion teacher, am I going to be included? And so I see all of these really great thoughts that you guys are throwing in, open to all. What were some of the others? Everyone's welcome, equitable, all of those things are part of an inclusive culture. And I think when we say that one room or one teacher is the inclusion room or the inclusion teacher, that the rest of these terms go out the window. And that's certainly not the case, and it should not be the case. So we're going to watch this little video from a phenomenal presenter and researcher. Her name is Shelley Moore. She has a YouTube channel, and I highly recommend that you check her out. You will get some of her videos as we progress through some of these trainings over the next few weeks. And she's going to talk about the idea of inclusion on a timeline. It's an evolution of inclusion. And so she's going to talk about these green dots. And in the video, she's going to mention the green dots. But then after the video, we're going to come back to the green dots and talk about them just a little bit more. So Nikki, if possible, go ahead and play Shelley.
Yeah, please give me a wave or something if you can't hear this, because the new Zoom update has the audio working a little differently. So if there's any issues, please yell at me.
Welcome to 5 More Minutes, useful videos in 5 minutes or less that support the teaching and learning of all students. I'm your host, Shelley Moore. Today's topic is the evolution of inclusion. Okay, so you remember the dots? I know. I've shown you these before. But one colleague of mine suggested to me once, he goes, what if we didn't look at these as different concepts that we compare to each other, but instead as an evolution of time? It was totally brilliant. Now we could look at this timeline through the lens of any marginalized population, but to understand this timeline from the inclusion and disability perspective, we have to go back in time a little bit. Many of us know or are connected to someone who experienced institutionalization. It was even recommended to families by doctors. Although British Columbia was the first province in Canada to close down their institutions, there are still individuals living in these conditions across Canada today. The institutionalization movement is an example of exclusion. It separated individuals with disabilities from their families without choice. But the disability rights movement over the past 50 years, with the hard work of some incredible self-advocates and families, and maybe a little help from Geraldo Rivera, pushed communities to shift so that individuals of all abilities were welcomed and living in the same settings as their family and friends. This shift from institutions to communities, this was the start of the inclusive evolution. We have movement, but can we do better? Although many individuals are no longer excluded from their families and communities, they were, and let's be honest, they still are, expected to attend segregated schools or self-contained special education programs that are totally separate from the rest of the school community. And so parents started to ask some very good questions. You see, children with disabilities have siblings without disabilities, and families wanted all their kids to have equitable access to community-based education together. Kids started to be integrated into classrooms with their peers. They're in math together. They're in gym class together. They're eating lunch together. Kids are together. This is better. The shift from segregated to integrated schools and classrooms, this is the next step in the evolution of inclusion. We have movement, but can we do better? Well, this is where things get tricky, because integration, it doesn't take long to realize that just being together, it's not enough. Although in the same classroom, students with disabilities are often just that. They're physically in the classroom. They may sometimes have parallel activities, but mostly it's loosely connected classroom tasks. Now, you don't need me to tell you that just physically sharing space and time is enough to make you feel like you belong in a community. I mean, come on, there are Disney movies made about this. Breathing the same air is not enough. Do you remember the Titans? I do. The evolution from integration to inclusion is now the topic of many conversations in communities and schools around the world. How do we support individuals to be meaningfully included and not just physically integrated? It's not just about where kids go in their day, but why. What is the purpose to the places that they go? It's now school-based teams and staff that are asking questions about how to do this. How can we support purposeful and meaningful placements for kids with disabilities? In inclusive classrooms and schools, students aren't just present, but they have roles and responsibilities in their classrooms and also meaningfully connecting to their peers. This is inclusion. So there you have it, my friends. A brief history of inclusion in about 5 minutes. If this is interesting to you, though, definitely investigate your local history as well, because every community is in a different place in this journey, and it's so valuable to know where we've come from. The other thing, though, is looking at these visuals as a timeline. It really helped me to shift my own thinking from which bubble am I at or not at, and shift to more about where are we now in our inclusive journey and what's our next step. All of a sudden, the goal of inclusion becomes action-oriented and just feels so much more possible. We may not all be at the same place in the journey, but we can all move forward. We can do better. And so this is the question I'm going to leave you with today. Can we still do better? Do you think there's another evolution in inclusion? What might that be? How can we inch even more forward to make inclusion even better? Thanks, Geraldo.
All right. I absolutely love that video by Shelley Moore, and she gives us so much to talk about. And I did see in the chat that someone asked a question about whether or not inclusion has been scientifically proven to be most effective. I'm actually going to hold off on answering that question because we have a slide that talks about that here coming up shortly. So I just want you to know, yes, I saw it. I'm going to answer that question for you. So Shelley really talks about these green dots, and she, as she's talking about them, I want you to think about where you are on this continuum, because we all have beliefs that we bring into the classroom. And so I like how she starts out with really thinking about, if we think about it, education specific to America, she is Canadian. So she's got a different lens from the educational and the historical perspective. But there was a long time in American history where certain groups of students were excluded from school altogether, whether it be because of race or disability. And so it was a place where you only got to go if you fit this green dot. So you had to check every single characteristic. And if you were fit into all of those, then you got to go to school, and everyone else was just excluded. So then we progressed to thinking, you know what, it's probably not good just to exclude all of those students from a school. They need to have their own place. And so that's where we get some of these separate facilities. And then sometimes the thought was even, well, we can all be in the same building, but we're in different rooms. And so maybe all of the general education students were in the main part of the school, but the special education students were hidden away in a wing, which is typically what we saw in when IDEA became law. So that's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And if anyone wants to take a guess at when that was passed, you can throw that in the chat, and that might be a quiz question on a training that we have coming up maybe next week. I'll tell you that answer if I get some guesses. But from the inception of IDEA until, you know, I remember in elementary school in the early 80s that I never saw the special education students. I didn't realize that we had special education students. It was a very rare time where we ever saw the students, and we never interacted with them. We didn't have recess or specials or lunch. We didn't even eat lunch together, for crying out loud. And it was still completely segregated within the school. And then it was like, you know, this probably isn't working either. So now we're going to be in the same classroom. And so we get, oh, someone got it exactly right. 1975 is when IDEA was passed. Yes. And thinking about that whole separate but equal thing, that was another legislation, Brown versus Board of Education, if anyone knows the date on that, just because I love this stuff and geek out over it. You can throw that in the chat. I can also share that date with you too. But we really started to go to more, you know, everyone's going to be in the same room, but some kids might be back at like that kidney shaped table or at separate desks. But so they're in the classroom, but they're not really engaged and involved. And Shelley talked about that. It's like they might be doing activities that might just be loosely connected, but they're not being pushed. And then we got to where everybody's kind of mixed in together. So if we think about this through legislation, this is really No Child Left Behind. Everybody's together. And then Shelley was really challenged after the making of that video. But those green dots look like they represent the same type of learner, right? Because they're all the same color. And she was like, you know what? That's a great thought, is that we know that no two learners are alike. And then to complicate, I'll say complicate, but to deepen our thought on it, Shelley's always asking, but can we do better? And so since the multicolored dot picture, she has answered that question. Yes, we can do better. And here's what it looks like. Drum roll. Here we go. So if we look at each person as a circle, we're kind of like a piece of pie. We perform differently in different environments. We perform differently when we're in different subject areas. So maybe if we're an elementary student, we're in the same environment for English and math, but we might be a different student in math than we are in English. Or maybe we're a different student altogether when we're in social sciences, because of our comfort level and because of how confident we feel with the subject matter. So really, we all have these areas of strengths, areas for growth and opportunities for potential development, and then areas where we really struggle. And this is reality, and reality is really tough. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that it's tough. And that's okay, because it's hard. This is not an easy fix. It's not an easy solution. And our learners are so varied and different, not just with academic areas, but also with those social and emotional competencies as well. Okay, so here's some research. This research was actually done out of IU at the Swift Center, and you can find the entire research study on the Padlet that we linked and told you about. And so here's what the Swift Center found. And I want to fully try to answer the question that was raised about it being scientifically proven. So I'm not going to answer it using the word scientifically, because I'm not sure that I can do that. But research does support inclusive practices. There is some new research coming out that's saying inclusive practices don't work. But I think you can find research to prove anything. So what I would always go back to answer that question even deeper is look at John Hattie's work. Rather than looking at one research study in isolation, I think it's important that we really look at a meta-analysis on best teaching practices, inclusive practices, and best educational strategies. And John Hattie has done a lifetime of work on putting studies together. I think his new meta-analyses are up to over 1,000 different studies that examine different teaching practices. And he uses effect sizes, which I'm not going to talk about because I know we're going to talk about the effective efficacy coming up. And Alana or Nikki, give me like a thumbs up. I can't remember, do we show a John Hattie thing in that?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, then I'm going to stop talking about John Hattie. That's coming up. But the Swift Center research shows us positive academic outcomes for kids. So we know that students really show increased academic achievement, assignment completion increases, classroom participation, graduation rates go up, and then the persistence in post-secondary education also increases. Students feel a greater sense of belonging. And that is a big part of inclusive practices. When we feel like we belong in an environment, we are going to perform better. I could think about this in terms of society or different activities that I'm involved in, different organizations. When I feel valued, I perform better. When I feel, even at work, in our jobs, when we feel like we belong, we're a better employee and we're a better performer. In addition to these positive academic outcomes, what research started to show that was surprising was that we started to see a decrease in several behavioral areas. So academic outcomes are increasing, and then we're seeing these positive behavior outcomes. Fewer discipline referrals, fewer suspensions, disruptive behaviors. Again, because part of it is that once we belong and we feel like we belong somewhere, we want to make the right choices. Okay, Alana, you can. All right, so I'm going to read a couple of definitions from a book by Julie Costin, and she has written several books, and she has a wonderful website called Inclusive Schooling. She and Christy Preddy-Franczak do it together, and they have some wonderful, valuable information. They have a lot of free resources as well. As I read these definitions, I just want you to think about them, and I want you to consider different words or phrases that jump out at you. And as I read them, you can throw those words or phrases in the chat. If you want to read this to yourself, you can go right ahead and do that. One thing that we can do for our learners is offer different ways to take in the content. So some people might like to hear it. Some people might like to read it for themselves. The choice is up to you. So the first definition, inclusive education, means that we no longer accept that separate classrooms, separate schools, and separate lives are the best interest of any student. Separating people by ability disadvantages everyone. Belonging is a human need. Our education system, practices, and spaces need to be reimagined. And so the second definition that I want to read, inclusive education means that every student is valued because of their strengths, gifts, and even challenges. A disability is simply diversity. Everyone benefits from meaningful participation and opportunities to learn grade level content with diverse peers. We must trust that all students come to us as whole people who do not need to be fixed. So those are two descriptive definitions from Julie Costin. And I did see in the chat, there was a question, is inclusion appropriate for all students? I'm gonna answer this on Nikki and Alana, feel free to jump in. But there are very rare situations where I believe that a student may not be able to fit into a classroom. But I think that those are and should be very far and few in between, and that when we look at like state testing, there's a 1% cap on students taking alternative assessments. 1% is a really small number, but I do believe that there are times when a student may not fit, especially if, oh my gosh, so sorry about that. Especially if that student, Stephanie's got her pet there, a dog maybe, I'm glad to see that. If a student is disrupting the education of the class, then there's a problem. But I will follow that up with, I always look at why the student is being disruptive, because I've been in many classrooms where the root of the disruption is a lack of classroom management. So when we ask ourselves, can the student really not, or is this the best place for the student? We need to ask ourselves, why are we thinking it might not be the best place? And then what's the root cause of that? Because sometimes it's an adult problem and not a student problem. And we have to stop letting adult problems impact students and make them student problems. So that's my response to that. Nikki, Alana, do you guys have anything that you would like to add or tell me that I'm completely off my rocker?
I don't, definitely not, you're not off of anything. I just wanted to offer in addition to that, because I think some of it, I have a niece, I shared with you earlier, Hannah's Hope. Medically, she was very fragile and inclusion was very difficult. And one of the lenses that we put on this, because yes, a core belief that I have is in inclusion. I think all children should be together in our communities, in our schools. But one of the lenses we took for this with Hannah, really because of her medical needs, we said, you know, inclusion is not appropriate right now because of her fragile medical condition. However, for her, inclusion is the goal. And I want to put that lens on for what Katie said regarding behaviors, regarding, I think if we put the idea on that all if inclusion is the goal for all students, that means that we can keep working toward it. So yes, Hannah had a serious medical need and she could not be in the classroom because of germs. But our inclusion goal was that we were going to get her zooming in through an iPad and, you know, those kinds of things to include her in small ways that were safe for her. And that could be part of your case conference goals and things like that as well. But, you know, Nick, you asked, is inclusion appropriate for all students? You know, as humans, we want to be included, and it's included, or inclusion is appropriate for all people. We just have to find the different ways it looks for each person, and what level of inclusion is appropriate for medical or different, you know, even anxiety needs, things like that. So I hope that put a different lens on it as well.
So here's a really good question that Nick asked, and Alana, this might be more maybe for you. I'm happy to answer, but being in the life skills room yourself, I think you might have some good answers to this.
No, I definitely think there is a place there's a continuum, right? In Indiana IEP, there's a continuum of services. Every student starts in the general education. If they're not able to receive their supports in there, then even with resources and help, that's when you take the student out of that and you kind of move to a more restricted environment. So no, I was a teacher with applied skills, intense interventions. My students still did go to general education, even though they were in a more restricted environment. They also took the alternate diploma track. So I had to teach them different standards. They're called CCCs if you teach in the life skills program. So I definitely think there's a place for both. I do not know. I personally think, and in Indiana, we have a continuum, and some parents want their students served in different ways, but you can be very flexible with it. And my kids would still try to go to some of the classes out in the gen ed, even though they were in my classrooms. I do believe in that. So legally, we do have to have a continuum of the services. That's what it's called. And yes, they are in more restrictive environments at sometimes so they can learn what they need to learn post high school and secondary. That would be my answer for that one. Hope that
And as my hero and mentor always has said in trainings, and she used to be a staff member, and she has moved on to greener pastures, but she always makes the comment that there's no special education Walmart. So once we're graduated, or even before that, we're all shopping in the same stores. We're all buying cars from the same car dealers. We're all banking with the same bankers. So I'll just leave that there. I love that lens when we think about it that way too. All right, Nikki, what's up next? Efficacy, woohoo! All right, and I get to turn it over. You guys get to hear from the lovely Alana on this.
All right, so we're going to talk about efficacy. I love all these questions and I love all the things in the chat, so I appreciate that. So Katie kind of talked about John Hattie's zone of desired effect, and we're not going to get really, really deep in this, but I want you guys, has anybody seen this? Thumbs up or thumbs down if you have seen it or not. I just am curious. But this is John Hattie's work, and Katie talked about it. It's a meta-analysis, which means he, I'm glad that if there's a no, then I can kind of know. But some people have seen this. So we want to be in the zone of desired effects, the blue. So anything above a 0.4 is going to increase the outcomes of students. And we know that our students have a huge gap sometimes. So anything in that zone of desired effects, the 0.4 and over, is really, really helpful for our students. So we want to focus on those instructional strategies that help students above that 0.4 and over. So the red is reverse. So those are things that do not help and they actually make things worse. For example, if you have a student, and this is in the research, if you hold back a student and they get the same thing the next year, so a student is not passing first grade, they get held back, they have the same teacher the following year, the research has said that actually is a reversal, like that's not helpful to the student. So that is that red. And the developmental effects, that's the yellow. That just happens when students are aging, right? They're going to get older. Those are kind of things that will happen naturally. Students walk, or kids walk, babies walk at a certain level, a certain timeline, a certain time frame. That's going to happen. The typical teacher effects is just a student with a good teacher. That is in that orange. That's good. That's going to happen, and like through the year, a student has a good teacher. They're going to read. They're going to get those 0.30. That's typical teacher effects in there. Those good kind of practices. We want the 0.4 and over. So we want to focus on, as teachers, as paraprofessionals, we want to focus on those strategies with the 0.4 and over, because that is going to help us decrease those gaps that our students have and increase their learning outcomes. So that's really what this zone of desired effect is. We want all of those good things that are happening in that 0.4 and over. And that's kind of, I'm going to go quickly with that because we don't have to go too deep in that, but hopefully that makes sense. We want those zone of desired effects. And now we're going to tell you what those are. Thanks, Nick. In a second. So the biggest one of the things is, and this is kind of awesome, is the big impact is you. So collective teacher efficacy is the collective belief of teachers in their ability to positively affect students with an effect size of 1.34, which if you remember from that little graph, it went up to 1.0. It actually goes further. So 1.34 is huge. It's a huge one. Collective teacher efficacy is strongly correlated with student achievement. So this means that you as a teacher believe that your students are able to do it, and you believe that you are able to provide things that you can get them to learn things. So keeping up with high expectations for your students. So making sure that you have these high expectations, even if your students have disabilities or whatever baggage or any of those other things that they have, the teachers, this is a huge effect if the teacher believes that he or she can propel them into greatness, really. So the 1.34 is huge when the teacher believes that they have the skills and the tools to teach the students, and they believe that those high expectations, that those students can achieve that is a huge effect size in all of the research. So it's kind of like when you get students with IEPs and you're like, oh no, I have these many kids with IEPs, and you see their labels, like you see all of the background, and before they even step in your classroom, you're like, they're not going to be able to pass this reading test. They're not going to be able to pass the iLearn because this, and this. By you saying that as a teacher or a para or anybody else in the school, they're not going to pass that test. I'm going to tell that's what the research is saying. So conversely, if you think, so what, they have this, and this, we have these high expectations, my students can do this. I have the ability to teach these students no matter what their label says, no matter what their IEP says. That is a huge impact. That's 1.34 is off the chart. And that is really kind of it's great to know, because you are very impactful in this way. And if anybody has anything to say, yes, I'm glad that you love that. We're going to listen to John Hattie to himself, kind of saying it probably a lot better than I have, really quickly in this video.
This one we have to scroll down for. I forgot about that. There we go.
We're flexible.
Well, the new number one in visible learning is teachers' collective efficacy. And on the one hand, that's exciting because it confirms the story. On the other hand, it's a bit of an unfortunate title. It kind of implies that having efficacy, having confidence, having all the teachers in the school believing they can make a difference, it's actually more than that. Now, to have a meta-analysis, you have to have lots of studies. This is not a new idea. This has been around a long time. But it's just that Rachel Ells was the one that pulled it all together to show what its combined effect was. And the message I want to get across, it is teachers working together to have appropriately high, challenging expectations of what a year's growth for a year's input looks like, fed with the evidence of impact. And that's what sustains it. It isn't just growth mindset, it's not just rah-rah thinking, it's not just, oh, we can make a difference, but it's that combined belief that it's us that causes learning. It's not the students. It's not the students from particular social backgrounds. It's not all the barriers out there. Because when you fundamentally believe you can make the difference, and then you feed it with the evidence you are, that is dramatically powerful.
All right. So that's him summarizing what I just said. It's not just you're not looking at their barriers. You're really seeing all of those things for the students, and you have those high expectations. So to promote the collective. And I like your guys' chat that you said you love that, and that's great. It is also a little bit scary because you're like, okay, what if they fail? That means, do I fail? But it is great to know that if you believe that you have the tools, those students can make those gains. The research does say that. Knowledge to support diverse student groups, skills to implement supports, and data for effectiveness. Those are the things that we talk about with teacher efficacy. We're looking at the data. We're looking at those gaps. We're going to say, okay, in second grade, these are the skills that the students need to know. The teachers have to know all of those kinds of things, so we know where our students are and where they're going to get to, and we have those tools that we know that how they're going to get there. So those are all of the things that promote the collective teacher efficacy in what John Hattie was saying. So we're going to have a shift. We have a shift in thinking. We are going to understand the thinking to shift in how we view learners who need additional support. We're going to presume competence, which means we're going to say that they could do it until proven otherwise. We're going to believe that they can do it, even if I always did this in my classroom because my students a lot of times maybe they were nonverbal and other things like that. And people would visit my classroom and they would be amazed at the things that they could do. And I would always wonder, and I would always say, well, of course they can do that. Like they can do it this way. I'm going to just tailor something for them. And so I always presume competence, making sure just because they can't maybe verbally tell you like anybody else, they're able to show you things in their own way. And I'm sure you guys have seen this in your classrooms too, but you have to presume competence. You have to believe that they can do it. And I always had that mindset in my classroom, and I would try to make different ways for them to show me what they know. We have to understand the role that context plays in teaching and the barriers that limits individuals. And we're going to understand that the less the content is limiting, the less support an individual needs. And we're going to talk about what that looks like with the environment versus all of the things that there are barriers within the student. We're going to have a shift in that thinking. And then next slide. So we're going to have a case study here, and I'm going to have you guys use the chat. And again, just like Katie said, if you want to read it yourself, that's great. You can tune me out. You can mute me, but I'm going to read it out loud, and then we're going to talk about the shift in this. So Tyson is an energetic and witty boy who attends kindergarten. He lives with his 2 teenage siblings and mother, who works the night shift at a 24-hour supermarket. Prior to kindergarten, he was watched by his grandmother. He did not attend preschool. Despite a lack of early formal education, Tyson entered kindergarten with strong reading skills. Almost immediately after Tyson started kindergarten, his mother began to receive phone calls. Tyson is calling out in class. Tyson won't stay in line. Tyson got mad and ran down the hall. The principal called a meeting and noted that Tyson was unable to attend to the teacher's instruction and was always out of his seat. Tyson was assigned a paraprofessional to support his behaviors, but the behaviors only escalated. The 3rd week of September, Tyson's mother received a form that requested Tyson to be evaluated due to his attention and behavior issues. Does anybody have any Tysons that they know? Any students that they have in their chat? So we are going to talk about some of these things. What are the Tyson's strengths? Is Tyson describing you? That's funny. What is Tyson's strengths or needs? Do you agree with the school's supports? And some of your other thoughts. So first, I'm going to give you some time to think about that. What are Tyson's strengths? And maybe what do you think he needs? And do you agree with the school saying that he needs to be referred to special education? Just I'm going to give you some wait time to think about those kinds of things. Nikki, maybe we could go back to like the first slide, I think, like where we kind of get like, and then thanks. Did somebody put that in the chat? Like, did someone add that? All right. I will. What are Tyson's needs? I'm going to just write it in the chat, the directions. And if you want to unmute, you can definitely do that. But yeah, I saw some people are writing in the chat, which is great. Definitely a strength. He has support at home. He has family. Somebody put that his strength is reading. Perfect. And then maybe after the strengths, what does Tyson need? What are some of his needs? What kind of things? Let's see. Oh, I love it, Bridget. Yes. Absolutely. He's never been in a classroom setting. His attention's hard, but he's a kindergartner, right? Great, Bridget. I love that. Yes.
MTSS, that's a funny idea. Not a lot of people think that way. I love that was said.
You guys all have great. Yes, great. This is great because we usually do this in person and we have like some times talk, but we're trying to do it as much as possible, engaging you as much as possible. Yes, patience. Yes. So visuals. So it looks like you guys are giving some solutions. You gave some strengths. So exactly. We did talk about Tyson himself, like what his strengths are and what his supports are. But and then somebody said visuals and somebody said, what else did you say? First and then choices for visuals, storyboards, needs to build a relationship with paraprofessional over time. Absolutely. Maybe there's somebody in the classroom that can help. Yes. So we want to think about the shift in not always trying to fix Tyson, but maybe can we fix some things in his environment? It says, like you guys were saying that he won't stay in line, or it says we won't stay in line. He gets mad and runs down the hall. So we kind of trying to elope. So what kinds of things can we build into his schedule that can help Tyson besides saying that, we need to refer him for special education or to get somebody to be with him all the time? Like what kinds of supports can we fit into the schedule or to his routine or to his lessons that can help with some of those things to get his energy out, right? So he is a kindergartner. He's never done, yes, there's breaks, perfect. He's never done school before, right? So we have to teach him how to do school like everybody else, and he's little. So just having this saying that he needs to be referred because of this should not be the first thing that we think about. The first thing that we think about is how many breaks is he getting? Is he able to talk to a peer in a purposeful way? Does he have a person that he could, like a buddy that he could talk to so he can share out? Is there, movement breaks going on? It's kindergarten. Is he able to, he does have a strong family, so that, yeah, student mentor. All of those kinds of things are helpful for the environment and not just like, oh, this is what's wrong with Tyson. So we're kind of trying to just fix the learner. We're not fixing the environment around him. We need to give him maybe some more hands-on things. Yes, it's great discussion. So all of those things are what we should look at first instead of just saying we need to refer him to special education services. We need to look at what's going on in the classroom, what he's good at reading. So maybe making him a reader of the directions in the classroom. Yes, having a calming corner, all of those kinds of things. You guys have great thoughts in here. So that is how we shift our learning to just trying to fix Tyson, but we really need to try to fix what's going on in the environment. And yes, reading morning announcements, all of those kinds of things should be happening. Those interventions should be happening first before we even think about referring Tyson to special education for referral. And he's in kindergarten. So a lot of schools don't even test kindergartners, I'm going to say, right, Katie? She's just like, but you shouldn't until, you have all of these other things to think about before we just say that Tyson doesn't fit into our classroom. How can we change our classroom to fit Tyson's strengths? And how can we support his needs? That's the way that I would look at that. Thanks, Nikki. Keep on going. And you guys did a great job. So when we restore our students, when you guys kind of said that, his perceived deficits, we like to reverse and say, what are the strengths? So think about your students in your classroom right now. What are some of your Tyson's deficits? We're going to rename them into strengths. So if Tyson cannot sit still, you guys talked about that. Restored, he's a kinesthetic learner. He needs to be moving. If he calls out, maybe he's eager to share his thoughts. Maybe he needs a whiteboard. If he can read, he might be able to write, and he could write down what he's thinking. Or he has a peer, like you guys said, that he can talk to. If he runs around the room, he's physically active. So he needs those movement breaks, and we need to build that into his schedule. If he has attention issues, which you guys said executive functioning, somebody, I think it was Bridget, he does best when actively engaged in student-centered tasks. So if there's too many if there's not enough hands-on or student-centered tasks, then he has a hard time thinking about those things. Can we figure out how we can help him with those instead of just saying he needs to be referred somewhere else? Yes, blurting out during class because he's trying to do that. So how can we change how he answers? So the problem is not within the individual, but rather the context. So we need to consider adjusting the instruction, the curriculum, or the environment to support learners. And it's actually on the next slide, it's a matrix, I think. Yes, this is our matrix. This is what it's called. So it's an ISIL matrix. So when you have a hard time with some students and you're thinking about some of your students, either now or next year when you have new students, think about what can I change to my instruction, curriculum, environment first before I think about the learner. If it's the instruction, are these students acting up when there's lectures going on? If there's too many lectures, my kids cannot just take notes. They're getting lost. Do they need a graphic organizer to help them with that instruction? Do they need to take a break because that's too much information at the same time? And it is hard when you're not the teacher. If you're the teacher, we can direct our instruction, but we see sometimes when there's classrooms where students have to pay a lot of attention or sitting in their seats for a long time, the behaviors might escalate. The curriculum, can we provide them alternate text if they're not able to read something, or can they get it verbally or audio? Can they get a picture? Can they get a visual, like you guys said? The environment, is there a way that we could have a movement break in there? Is there a way that, these students need something to, and it's not just that something is wrong with the learner all the time. What's wrong with the instruction, curriculum, and environment? And then, of course, there's sometimes where we try to fix all those things and there's still something that's going on. And then we have to look at the learner. But we have to try to fix what is in our control in school versus the student, because we can't change Tyson. We want to say, he has deficits, but we want to try to make them strengths. We want to think about our lesson plans in that way so we can restore our students and try to find ways to best meet their needs as much as possible. So we already kind of talked about this in the chat, and so we're not going to go too much, but thinking about your own students, this is kind of a nice chart we have in the slides, and you can think about this if it was just blank, and you can say, how do we restore these students, and what kinds of things can we make to their day? And we kind of already walked through all of these things to help whatever student that you have. And you guys did a great job on doing this naturally in the chat. So we're not here together, but this is kind of a nice slide for you guys, because I would think about this with my students. I have these kids and they're having a hard time with these things. How can I restore them? And what can I do to change their day to help them with whatever that deficit is and try to make it more strength-based? So that's just kind of a reference for you guys.
Do you want to introduce this video at all, or do you want me to?
No, I'm just going to let you play it and then we'll talk about it in a second. It's just a really cute video.
Dear teacher, I know it doesn't always seem like it, but I really do want to listen and learn.
It's just my brain is kind of different. So this is what I'd like you to know about me. I have to move, or I really can't pay attention.
Even though I'm not looking at you, I can still listen to what you're saying.
If you tell me, sit up straight, now I have to use all of my brain to do just that.
It makes me feel sad when you tell me to try harder, even though I've already tried as hard as I can. I actually listen better when I'm rocking in my chair. When you give me a bunch of directions, I start to think I will never remember all of this. Sometimes my mom or dad ends up doing all of my homework. So here's how you could maybe help. Let me get up and move while I'm learning.
Let me look wherever I want when you talk to me.
Let me rock or slouch in my chair.
No matter what, please don't take away my recess. Give me help I could do all by myself. Make directions very short.
Just ask me, what does your brain need right now?
And one more thing. My brain might be different than yours, but it's still amazing. Sincerely, your student.
Your student.
Your student. Your student.
I love that video. It's just a cute little video that talks about how everybody's different, and hopefully you guys like that too. But it really just reminds you that sometimes they're not trying to do all of these things to us. And so it's just a cute little thing. It's just called Dear Teacher, if you want to look it up on YouTube and use it or show somebody else. I really like that. I really like that video. So yes. So I'm gonna keep on going. So John Hattie's meta-analysis of numerous educational studies revealed that students' expectations of their own success are among the greatest predictors of their outcomes, with an effect size of 1.44. So remember, 0.4 and over to 1 is huge, is big. Anything 0.4 and over is great. We want that. 1.44 is even better than the teacher efficacy. So students believing that they're able to do it, they have goal setting, they're going to meet their goals, they're able to do it, they have the tools and they know the know-how, is an effect size of 1.44. So that is also another great thing to do, that students believing in themselves. So that was just kind of put together with that other video. Their brain might be different, but it is great. And with that, here's a great brain. Nikki is up.
All right, I'll take over with that. Thank you for the compliment. Usually she makes fun of me, so I'll take compliments. All right, so what we want to kind of think about, I know as a teacher, I felt overwhelmed thinking, how am I going to do the restoring, do all of these things for every single student individually? And I know that many of you out there in the universe are thinking the same thing. Differentiation is so hard. Being inclusive of everyone's needs is so difficult. And that's why there are some frameworks and systems that help us to meet the needs of all of these learners efficiently, so that you do sometimes get to go home without, a giant bag of extra work to take home with you. So that's what we're going to jump into here in this last section as we get through this. So earlier in the chat, you all, it was sort of a spoiler alert, the system that's in place in Indiana schools to really address the needs of all students is MTSS. And MTSS is multi-tiered systems of support. And that means that we have these sort of wraparound of services that are available within the building to help support students, but in a more broad construct to support teachers as well. So when we look at MTSS as a whole, we know that we have to have building leadership that understands what teachers need, what support staff needs, all of that. We also have to have capacity building infrastructure. So how do we take the excellent staff that we have and be able to build their capacity? Do we provide regular training? How do we get them to that efficacy point where they believe that they have the knowledge and skills and tools necessary to meet the needs of all of these students in their classroom and in the school in general? There has to be a framework for communication and collaboration. We know that while it sounds glorious to be able to shut the door and just kind of, teach your heart out, we know that that is one of the points that contributes to teacher burnout. We have to, as teachers, collaborate in order to meet all of these needs. So whether you're a teacher, a para, an administrator, we have to have people to bounce ideas off of, to discuss things with. So that communication and collaboration is so important, because that's not only going to keep us as educators from burnout, but it's also going to provide best practices for us in the classroom that will meet the needs of our students. We also, within MTSS, we have to have that problem-solving process. When you have some of those questions Nick was asking earlier, what is the right thing to do here? There's a lot of gray area in education where sometimes the right thing to do is to make those individual decisions within your building, because what works here in Northwest Indiana is probably not something that is going to work for a building in Southern Indiana. Each building, each group of teachers and students is so unique that we have to be able to solve problems in ways that are meaningful for those environments. The multiple tiers of instruction and intervention, this little triangle is what you think of most of the time, probably when MTSS comes up. All the time people go back to that pyramid and look at how we address student needs. And with that, the tiered instruction, that means that we work really hard to create that base level foundation of instruction that meets as many needs as possible. We call that our tier 1 instruction, and we look to just really meet the needs of as many kids as possible. And then from there, we support with extra supports throughout the tiers of that pyramid. We'll dig into that a little further here in just a moment. And then finally, really looking at the evaluation piece of it, taking the information we have about how things are going, both qualitative and quantitative data, and decide is it working? Is it working for all the students? And is it working for each student? And which of those students are doing well? Which students need additional support or different kinds of support throughout the framework? So all of this goes into MTSS, even though likely the main focus for those of you who are classroom teacher really kind of comes into this pyramid piece here, which is where we'll spend some time talking about the inclusive classrooms and how we can build on this pyramid of support. So when it comes to this, with digging a little deeper into this, we think about this from a few different lenses, but one of the big questions we always are asked is, where do these things fit on the MTSS in the pyramid? Where do my high ability students fit? Where do my students with IEPs fit? Alana and I both have been in buildings where someone says, oh yes, well, those students are my tier 3 students because they have IEPs. But the MTSS system is set up to not be that way. It's to be everybody gets what they need for each of those different areas. So you might have a high ability student who needs additional support in something like problem solving and really being able to apply the knowledge that they have meaningfully, and that's where a student needs extra support. And for that particular area, they're in that tier 3, getting that targeted support from teachers. And throughout all of this, throughout all levels, all tiers of instruction, is that specially designed instruction that's outlined in IEPs. We include that there because it's so important to know that SDI, that specially designed instruction, can be implemented in the tier 1 in the general education classroom, or tiers 2 and 3, depending on the needs of the student and the abilities of the instructors as well. So what we want to look at, because each of those makes such a different, because each student is so unique, we have to be able to make different decisions based on the whole child. So while some students might have more significant needs, say in behavior, but fewer academic needs, or vice versa, we want to be able to make this very flexible and fluid so that we can address all of the needs of each child. Sometimes this has all of these extra levels in it. You look at the blue and red lines there. We could have a student who benefits very well from the tier 1 instruction being offered in math, but then needs a little bit of extra support in, say, literacy or problem solving, and really needs extra support in the area of behaviors. But we can look at it from all of those, each unique lens, to really address the needs of the whole child, not just this student has an IEP, so they must need support in all of these areas. We can't just put a student in that tier 3 because they have a little bit of paperwork on there. So when we look at each of these different tiers, it's important to understand what we can do as teachers to best meet the needs of that particular tier of instruction. With tier 1, this is our core instruction. This is the regular, the good stuff that you do each and every day in every class that you teach, in every interaction that you have with students, giving them directions, monitoring behavior, all of that. Your core instruction is tier 1. And what we want in a tier 1 setting is we want them to be evidence-based programs and practices. This means that we are using good, clear models, explicit instruction, and having a gradual release of responsibility. Alana mentioned earlier the efficacy result of that is students believing that they have the ability to do something is so key to their success, knowing that they have the skills, and that's where this evidence-based programs and practices come in. If we're giving students clear models, good instructions, and we're slowly releasing responsibility to them to practice, then they're going to see more success right off the bat. I know that when my daughter started a different math class when she was in 8th grade, and it was much more difficult mathematical things that I hadn't seen in a really long time, like probably since undergrad. And the very first day she brought it home, I thought, I don't know how to do any of this. I'm going to have to hire a tutor for her. I can't believe I'm a teacher and I have to do this, hire a tutor for her. But really what it was that it was so many concepts I couldn't remember all at once, that after a few days of kind of going through and practicing, I was then able to take over more responsibility of it. So because I was able to gradually take on small skills, because I was using Khan Academy and watching some skill videos, and so with the gradual release, I felt more successful pretty quickly. And that's available for our students as well. We can't have them start off with the big math problem. We have to start off with the step-by-step approach, making them feel successful in every step of it. I have a 2nd grader who's learning to borrow and carry, and every time she remembers the number she carried at the top, she says, yes. Because she's excited she remembered it, because a few weeks ago she was forgetting what she borrowed and carried every time. So those evidence-based practices of really slowly releasing that responsibility to our students are going to be effective, and we'll know for sure that they're effective because they should be meeting the needs of at least 85% of students. That's a great way to take the temperature on your core instruction. If 80% of your students are meeting the benchmarks that you have set out for your class, that means your core instruction is there. Sometimes we see the flipped triangle on this. You gave a test and you realize that only 10% of your students passed it. When you see those results, you stop and you say, okay, I better go back and try this again, because there was something not quite right about the way I taught it because I didn't reach my students. And that's what we want in that tier 1 instruction. We want to be meeting 80% of our students. We're going back and really taking another look at it. All of tier 1 begins with clear goals. How do we expect all students to learn? How do we know if they've learned it? And how are we going to respond if they don't understand? So what are we going to do to help provide additional supports? And knowing that upfront is so important. As we look at tier 1, I kind of talked through both of these at once, I'm sorry. But you do have to have that universal understanding of how your students are doing. For literacy in particular, this could look like those phonics screeners, those different screeners that you do throughout those early literacy years to make sure that your students are progressing in each of those skills as you go through. Again, making sure that you have high quality instruction at tier 1. I think I'm missing some slides. I'm so sorry. Nope, maybe not. Okay. I apologize. I thought I had some more slides in there on tier 2 and tier 3 as well. But I will talk a little bit just quickly about the tier 2 and tier 3 pieces. I want to make sure that we address some things. When you get to that piece, it's important to know that tiers 2 and 3, they don't mean sending a student out of the room or removing a student from instruction. We're looking at inclusive practices. If 80% of my students have the concept, can they practice it? Can this be a math game, some extra practice, something that they're doing that's a little bit extra while I work with the other 20% who are still struggling, who need extra assistance, extra help through that. And it could be that who I work with a little bit extra today is very different than who I work with a little bit extra tomorrow. And each day changes because, again, we have that whole child approach where we're meeting the needs of students across different disciplines and across different, across each discipline, and then across their specific needs for social and behavior as well. All right, and the last thing that I want to kind of share, and I'm hoping that you all will enjoy this video and do a little bit of interaction here at the end. My very favorite video by Shelley Moore is her video all about the 7-10 split. I grew up with a grandfather who used to take me to the bowling alley all the time because he loved to bowl. So I also always think of him, but she talks a little bit about how we can approach the Tier 1 instruction so that we can make our lives a little more manageable. So as you watch this video, I'd like for you to think about something that you do in the classroom to make sure that the first time you teach something, the first time you provide that instruction to students, you're meeting as many needs as possible in your planning and in that initial instruction.
Hi, my name is Shelley Moore, and I'm a third-year PhD student at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. As Canadians, we have a reputation for finding and embracing the strength in our diversity. This value, however, hasn't been reflected in our classrooms, which still segregates students by ability, especially students with developmental disabilities. There's a gap in our understanding about what we know inclusive education to be, philosophically, versus what we understand and the importance of understanding inclusion in our practice. This is the question I'm trying to answer in my research, is how can we find the value in the day-to-day practice in our classrooms in terms of inclusive education? So how am I gonna explain this to you? Now I can sit here and try and describe this, or we could have a little bit more fun. Why don't we go bowling? So let's talk about bowling. You have 10 pins, you have 2 balls, and you have a lane. The goal is to knock down as many pins as you can. But if you don't get them all, it's okay because you have another chance. But when I bowl and roll the ball down the middle and I don't knock them all down, what often ends up happening to me is that there's 2 pins left standing on either end and they stare at you. It's the 7-10 split and it's the hardest shot in bowling. How is bowling like teaching? The ball was the lesson, the pins are the kids. We aim for the middle, we do the best we can. The pins that are left standing, we often have another chance to kind of get to them, but at the end of the day, those 2 pins that are staring, looking at you, are kids who need the most support and are kids who need the most challenge. So we end up choosing one, and the other one is left standing. I just took all the fun out of bowling. Now, I don't know how many times you've watched professional bowling, but I spent an afternoon watching professional bowling, and let me tell you, there was not one bowler who rolled that ball down the middle of the lane. They throw the ball down the lane at a curve. And I was actually really curious about this, so I called up a professional bowler. He was so excited. I don't think he gets a lot of calls about education. He said the reason why the ball has to enter at a curve is because you will knock down more pins and create a bigger domino effect if you enter at that angle. But in order to do that, you have to change your aim. In order to knock down the most pins with one shot, he aims for the pins that are the hardest to hit. Now let's just let this sink in for a second. We are taught to teach the head pins. We are not taught to teach to the kids who are the furthest and the hardest to get to, the kids with autism, the kids with Down syndrome. The part that's critical here, and it really aligns with Universal Design for Learning, is that so often the supports that we design for those kids on the outside of the lane are actually supports that all of the kids need. This is the part we need to understand if inclusive education is going to move forward in Canada. How can we find this value of diversity in our classrooms between the students? This is not just important for the outside pins, but it's critical for every single one of us. And just think, all we need to do is change our aim. Look how bowling changed education.
So I hope you enjoyed, we've shown you 2 now videos by Shelley Moore today, but this one really was about how our aim and the students that we aim for can really transform how things go for us in the classroom. She often calls it retrofitting. If we have to go back and fix things, it's actually harder than just doing it a little differently initially. So I want you to share for me in the chat, just for their last couple minutes here, what are some things you do to reach the students you know ahead of time? These students are going to struggle, so I'm going to give everybody this really great thing. I know visuals were a big part of me in my classroom experiences. I would always try to add a visual for everything I did because I knew a couple of kids really needed it, but everybody would benefit from it. So give me a couple of ideas in the chat of what you do to aim for all students. Love that. Thank you, Bill. Building that relationship is so key from the very beginning. If they have that trust and that confidence with you, then they're going to be willing to try and really persist even when they struggle. And they'll trust that you're going to give things to them that are manageable and that will help them reach their goals. Great. Love clear expectations. Excellent. One opportunity for students to hear it. Yeah. We start with that community circle, right? We know that, having students believe that they belong in the room and that they are valued in that place really makes such a difference for them. Lots of hands-on learning. Anytime we're putting manipulatives, that's a great one. Games in front of kids. Lynn, I love that you said peer interaction because we know that when students are able to talk to each other about the content, even just those quick turn and talks, those are so powerful. And so evidence-based as well, being able to process what they're learning with those quick interactions are great. Yeah, Joyce, you bring up a great point. We have to have a game plan up front for what the lesson will look like. Really knowing ahead of time, we have to think about where our students will struggle and where they will, go a little quicker. And we have to plan for those things, both for time, but also for this is where they'll need a number line. This is where they'll need colored pens or manipulatives or something else to go with it. Great, lots of Bridges had lots of think, pair, share. I love that. Great, thank you to everyone for participating in the chat and for sharing that with a clear expectations. I love it. A clear model goes so far in every, whether you're K to 12, a clear model up front showing students what is expected really goes so far for them. Great.
Katie and I told Nikki that they are rock stars on these webinars, right? They're using the chat. That's so nice to see. So thank you guys for participating in that.
They've been bragging about you all week, so I'm so excited to be able to join in and see you. Yeah.
Nikki, I just want to say one thing that it's like burdening my heart with some questions that were asked earlier about, inclusive practices and including all students in the classroom and all of that sort of thing. I think for us as teachers, administrators, people serving on case conference committees, people working with children, that one thing that we have to keep in mind too is and Shelley alluded to this, but what is the purpose for the child being in the general education classroom? Because sometimes the purpose may not align with necessarily the lesson plan. And what I mean is that sometimes the purpose of a student being in a classroom is maybe peer socialization, or maybe it's to have a peer model. It may not necessarily be to get grade level content. So if you're in a role where you don't create your own lessons and you're not using different principles that we'll talk about later on, like differentiation and universal design for learning, then maybe asking the question like in a very non-threatening way, because this question can seem very threatening, but what's the purpose of having the student here? Is it a response that would kind of go through me, but it's a legal obligation? Or is it that, look, we are really working on a social goal. We're working on a communication goal. We're working on a self-advocacy goal. Like maybe there's a reason. So finding out the purpose and knowing the purpose is super key as well.
I love that, Katie. That's a great explanation.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for coming. We have one last thing for you.
And not rude at all, Nick. No, like all three of our hearts, this is where our hearts are. So I want to always answer questions that are going to be in a way that make people think that, yes, we should be moving in this direction. I love the questions.
Yeah, no, we did not think it was rude. We were just trying to make sure we answered it correctly, and we know that there are outliers, and we always say IEPs are for individualized education. So we want to make sure that yes, we have to serve the purpose depending on the student. We just hope you yeah, we did not take that like that at all.
I see your comment about looking for info to take the administration. John Hattie's work, we did not go into. I have slides and slides of
I
all
know.
of the different inclusive practices and the evidence behind them. So you're welcome to send either of us an email or any of us an email, and we can share some of that information with you if you're looking for more of those meta-analyses practice that we referred to. For everyone, before you go today, if you could take the time and fill out here on the left side of your screen is our evaluation. So you could scan the QR code or go to iepta.org/eval. And we are really excited to hear your feedback. This is the first in a series, so we will use your feedback to make adjustments and learn a little bit more about how we can better serve you in these next 4 in the series. So thank you for being here today. We will definitely stick around for questions for a little while. Please, visit our website as well on the right there to check out other things that we have available for you online. Thanks.
And I just threw a link in the chat. This is a place I refer to a lot, but it has the meta-analysis, and it basically just ranks the different like educational practices or strategies or interventions in order from most effective, and it's like 250 of them. So that's also a great place to go to. So you don't have to read a book or a long journal article. This lists them out, and you can click on the link for each one, and it will tell you a little bit more